Hi, I'm Ori, and I use they them pronouns. As in, they went out to have dinner, or I'm sure you won't bother them. If you couldn't tell already, I'm transgender, and if you're listening to this, I'm going to assume you want to learn a thing or two about me and other people like me. Of course, I could just read a bunch of facts at you for an hour or two, but I'm going to try and make this a little more interesting and provide some unique insights, if I can. When I first came up with this idea, I wanted to try and make a nice Trans 101 style thing because I think a lot of people just don't know about trans folks in the first place, and so I wanted to help out as much as I could. But before we even get to all of that, there's some other stuff we have to get to first. Namely, what the heck is gender in the first place?
Gender is not nearly as neat and tidy as we think it is. We have to break down a binary concept and think much harder about a continuum or a spectrum. I'm Tracy Skelton, so Tracy spelled with an E. I've been working at NUS for what will be close to 15 years. I'm focused on human geography, so it's about the social, spatial kind of connections between people, places, spaces. The pronouns thing, I don't generally use those. I suppose I should have more conversations with people about it.
So my name is Mie, and like Tracy, I'm a member of FSS Gender and Sexuality Research Cluster. I am a linguist. I've been studying language, gender, and sexuality as one of my main fields. And the pronoun thing, I have she and they, but they as an ally. A lot of linguists nowadays have they pronoun after to indicate allyship.
I managed to get an interview with these two professors to talk about the bare bones basics of what you have to know in order to even begin thinking about trans people, which is thinking about gender in general first.
So in terms of what I want to try and get people to understand around gender is the fact that it was quite a breakthrough when the term gender became available or was sort of worked through, because initially it was very much about sex, the biology of the body. And of course, we know now more and more because there's been more openness around it, and also people who've been affected by particular birth situation in the sense of their genitalia and their kind of evidence of whether they're supposedly male or female has become explored much more in detail, not least with intersex people. And there are people, so for example, the Dominican Republic in the Caribbean has some of the highest rates of intersex born people, and they have just accepted that as a kind of third gender. The knowledge of those, it used to be hidden and people would be embarrassed, and surgeons used to make decisions, and still do in many places, around changing the genitalia so that it fits that this child is either a man or a female. And that has been critiqued by many people who've gone through that process and have grown up and realised that actually they were put in the wrong gender by the surgeon or the decision. But of course, everybody knows that a common reaction when babies are born is, is it a boy or a girl? And so that reinforcement of a particular binary gender has been very, very powerful, and is still very powerful. And there are people who get very angry about the idea of something that has to be fixed. You can't leave somebody in a middle space. And increasingly we recognise that there are those middle places or that continuum.
While the intersex community is very closely related to the trans community, I would like to point out that they are very much distinct groups of people, even if there is a lot of overlap between the two groups. This podcast, of course, focuses on trans people, mostly because I myself am dyadic, or in other words, not intersex. But because the issues are very intertwined, I'd like to recommend some places to go more in depth into the issue, which will be linked in the podcast description. Now we know that gender is weird and complex, but why do people want to hold on to more old school ideas of gender? Well, it's about
essentialism.
Or in this case, gender essentialism. The idea that there is some kind of essence that makes somebody a boy or a girl no matter what. Or as Professor Hiramoto puts it,
there's this imposition on people to declare whether you belong to category X or category Y. And if you don't fit into these categories, there comes stigma. So I personally don't think media doesn't help very much, because a lot of times the young children from early on gets colored with idea. There's nothing natural about baby girls wearing pink or baby boy wearing blue. but this has been naturalized and people think it's normal. It's fabricated. So these distinctions, it's very difficult to see. And if we are educated adults, we should be able to tell that. But you just buy into this dominating ideology, right? So those are the problems that we see with gender.
Professor Hiramoto also went on to talk about Disneyification, the process in which ideas and cultures become more family-friendly so as to fit or mirror the Disney brand, though it need not be a Disney product.
Yeah, so Disneyification is a term coined by a sociologist some time ago to criticize Disney. So how come this markedness? I'm not talking about semiotics, so not talking about language per se, but when you compare Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse, who is more colored? Minnie Mouse has a big old eyes and makeup. You see the natural creatures cannot tell the distinctions of the gender. But this is an imposition of essentialism, an example, right? So then they speak like boys, they speak like girls. So from early on, not just in Singapore, Japan too, or other places, children are inspired to be like that. So there are many studies. I'm talking about Walt Disney Productions now. Disney stores sell these toys. Children do not deviate the play. They play the roles that they see in a show. That actually help them enact what's expected. So if these things are happening from earlier on, this track of what's normative and non-normative are divided in a quite significant, the level.
I've personally seen a very good video essay that talks about gender in Disney cartoons, which I will also link in the description of the podcast.
As a media, maybe commercials, TV commercials coming from, the UK, States, in Singapore, makeup, women are expected to put on makeup like that, or dress like that. But a lot of times they are photoshopped, and no matter how much makeup you buy and put it on, you can never look like that without Photoshop. So this is an influence of media that it just puts too much pressure on. I would say earlier on, people are talking about girls. So the Barbie dolls, I think in Singapore, they are prevalent too. Some people say that only 5% of people, mostly from Scandinavian descent, have that kind of proportion. So 95% of people do not fit into it. It's physically impossible. But then you make the target so like that. Of course, it's going to influence people with naturalized inferiority complex. So how do they compensate to be the model that they cannot be? Oh, I'll speak in a way that people think I'm more ladylike. But no, everybody wants to be like that. So it takes the room out of those people who don't want to be like that or who don't feel comfortable being like that. So I say, coming to Singapore specific context, Singapore, I love Singapore. Yeah, I think I've been here for like 13 years or so. And I enjoy it and I am blessed to be here. At the same time, I've never seen, especially for children, this massive kind of pressure put on to fit into the streams. Talking about PSLE and all these other things, everything is so pressure. Then whatever little times they have, they are still expected to play this given idealized gender roles because people want to be normal. I see in Singapore, maybe there's less room to be individualistic because this prescriptive normative ideology is dominating a bit excessively in different areas. One last example I say is some of the media that was not targeted for Singaporean audience. Some, I think it just fits so well. Something like Finding Nemo, they became Finding Dory later too. But talking about this, the clownfish, they are hermaphrodites. So it's not possible for Nemo, the boy, to go on a trip with the father because the hermaphrodite fish will turn into a female if there's no dominating female around. It is, scientifically impossible, but it works well. It's the romanticism going ahead of scientific reality. And people think it's okay.
Of course, Professor Hiramoto is a linguist, so we also talked about one of the biggest ways gender is expressed in English, pronouns.
So this is Judith Butler, and she also referred to something like regulatory discourse, meaning that the terms like she or so this he, these words have a perlocution to linger. So if I call Andrew he,
The person who helped me set up this interview with the professors. If you're listening, thank you once again.
so then at the same time declaration that we acknowledge him to be a male person. Therefore, we expect him to act like a male person. So he does something that society doesn't think it's masculine. There is some kind of a judgment, and people think it's okay to do that.
Now that we've gone through all of that, I think we can start talking about trans people properly. According to Merriam-Webster, transgender means being a person whose gender identity differs from the sex the person had or was identified as having at birth. What this means for someone, of course, varies from person to person. And because being transgender is affected by everything else in your life, I wanted to get other trans people on to talk about their experiences.
Okay, hi, my name is Gray. My pronouns are they, them.
Once again, they, them as in they like browsing websites in order to buy pins and plushies, or their music is genuinely mesmerizing to listen to.
Yeah, so I work as like a barista at my parents' cafe. Well, I'm like a barista and a floor manager, you would say. But outside of that, I do a lot of like music stuff, so just, you know, as a hobby mainly, but you know, I like to sing and play the guitar and ukulele, and I tend to record myself doing a lot of like different song covers and stuff like that. So yeah, I would say those are my two main things that I have going on right now.
My name is Randy, and my pronouns are Faye, Fair, or they, them.
Faye Fair is in Faye is a really big fan of Watsky, or Fair Rats were all named after Mario characters.
Generally, I am an artist, so I make a lot of art. Most of my time is spent making art. Or recently, I've been at the State House a lot here in Indiana because of activism and stuff. There's a lot of attacks on trans people, so a lot of my time is painting and activism.
It's really cool to like see you physically paint things and have them up on your wall behind you.
Yeah, I love having it all behind me so that I see all my stuff all the time.
To start off, I asked them about what their own journey of gender self-discovery was like.
Can't really point to like a single moment or like a day or like a week where I was like, oh, I have decided, I have figured out that I'm trans or non-binary, which is the word that I use to describe my gender. But I think it was like a period of time, honestly, a couple of years. I've seen a lot of people refer to it as like your egg phase, where you like haven't like really hatched yet, but like you're kind of incubating, like the thoughts are there and you're kind of realizing things slowly as things continue to happen to you. So for me, okay, so I'm not just non-binary, I'm bisexual as well. So for me, it was really like tied to this kind of exploration I was having with my like sexuality when I just turned adolescent. So I was about like 15, like 14, 15, 16 years old, that kind of thing. So honestly, like discovering my sexuality on its own, like realizing that I was like attracted to women and engaging with my peers, what that meant, and then even like going through with like a crush and then dating someone for the first time who was a girl, and then because I was also perceived as a girl that you know, I had to do a lot of sneaking around and it was just like a lot of horrible closet stuff.
The closet is a phrase that LGBT people use when they talk about when they have to hide their own identities from the people around them, whether it's because they're waiting for a good time to tell others or come out of the closet, or if it's to maintain their own safety.
So I had that whole period of time where I had really like settled in pretty quickly. I had like realized, oh yeah, my attraction, like my bisexuality is like, oh, that's like a legit thing. And I did that when I was like 15, like 14, 15, and I settled into that pretty quick, and I just accepted that about myself pretty quickly because I was like, yep, checks out. But I think it wasn't until being comfortable in that and seeing the world a little differently through that I kind of realized that, hey, this gender stuff is kind of working out a little weirdly for me. That you know, like I was dating my girlfriend then at the time, and I just wasn't comfortable with certain things, just like to do with like my body, and I was just like wondering like, oh, am I really not comfortable with like how I present to other people? And then I had also cut my hair short since I was 14, and I was facing quite honestly a little bit of strife at home with my presentation kind of just naturally leaning towards more masculine things. I would get into arguments with my mom about it because she just wasn't about that, because she likes to assume all kinds of things from appearances. And I mean, her assumptions weren't wrong, but I just couldn't find a big enough deal of it at the time to really understand where her point of contention was coming from. So I think it was all these kinds of little things that made me realize, oh, I think my gender is a lot fluid than I thought it was. And I remember when I first started realizing that, oh, I'm not cis, I had latched on to the term gender fluid because I was just going through a lot of changes at the time, and I wasn't exactly shy away from like presenting femininely or doing all those sorts of things, because like even though I was a pretty masculine person throughout, just like the way I presented and the way I interacted with other people, like I didn't necessarily find it really important to present any certain way whatsoever. I just like felt like myself, but also knew that people always like saw me differently because of it. So, and I remember so it was around during my like sec 2 and sec 3, I think, was the points in time where I was like really questioning, like sec 2, 3, and 4, yeah. So most of my secondary school days was like me kind of figuring out that I was kind of finding the ways in which I was more comfortable expressing myself, and then realizing that naturally I was very gender non-conforming because of the way I preferred to present myself.
GNC, or gender nonconforming, essentially just means not fitting into pre-existing gender stereotypes or roles. A good example is being androgynous, though it's not the only way to be gender nonconforming.
And then it kind of took me a while to be like, oh, this gender thing isn't cutting it. Like, I'm not a girl, I'm not a woman, and these experiences have like always felt so alien to me, but I never really bothered to question it that much before. But then when I started questioning it because I knew everyone else saw me differently, I was like, oh, this makes way more sense for myself. But I had a couple close friends who I would confide in this about, and I remember I had this really wonderful senior who she helped me buy like a proper binder for the first time.
A binder is a tank top-like piece of clothing that people wear in order to compress their chest to make it look more flat, essentially.
Like, I remember I had gone to like Pink Dot and I had gotten like a free binder there, and I tried it, and it was like the most euphoric thing I've ever felt in my entire life.
A big component of being transgender is experiencing gender euphoria and gender dysphoria. Gender euphoria is generally described as a sense of comfort and belonging with your own gender, and is ultimately the goal for a lot of trans people, to feel comfortable in their own bodies. While gender dysphoria is a sense of very strong discomfort with your own body, though not all trans people experience this.
But then I got my senior, she helped me buy like a legitimate binder, and then when I got that for the first time, like I thought I was floating. Like everything made so much sense. And so yeah, it was just like yeah, so that was kind of just like my baby journey there. So I had kind of like thought, well, I'm like not a girl. Like the first time I heard the word like demigirl, I was like, hey, that makes total sense. I'm just gonna casually claim that. And I think I did that when I was 14 or 13, and then I just didn't think about it. And then when I hit like 15, I was like, wait, let me think about this a little more. And then, you know, like being on the internet and seeing that, oh, there are people like me who experience this too, and this is like the language they use to describe it, and like finding solace in that and being like, oh, so this is like a legit thing that happens to people, and being like, okay, so like I can do that too. Oh, okay, I can enjoy that as well. And then when I did start trying it out, I was like, oh yeah, this makes so much sense, you know? But a lot of it, like, yeah, it's just, I don't know, it felt like a very like personal journey. Like I hadn't really decided much in the way of like names or pronouns, because I kind of just didn't really care about other people at the time. I just didn't really care how people were talking to me or judging me or looking at me. I was just kind of like, okay, what do I want? Like, who is it that I like? How do I want to present myself to people? How do I want people to talk to me? And it was just like a very interesting experience, just being naturally... I say naturally gender non-conforming, but like that doesn't really mean anything. But like I always just like tend to skew in just like the middle all the time, and maybe I don't know if that somehow contributes to me not having like a lot of dysphoria about a lot of things. But I genuinely am like, so I think it's generally just having a good childhood and having a lot of perhaps unearned self-esteem that I can just kind of be comfortable with just whatever I feel like, without feeling too much strife or judgment from other people. Let me take a little further into the timeline. So that was just like that was kind of like the early period. And then I think when I hit JC, it was really like things started to really change, because I had been like wearing my binder and having short hair, and I was just like, all my clothes just like really masculine clothes, and I just kind of like presented in a that kind of way for like years, but then I think things really started to change when my parents had left, and then I was by myself for like my entire last year and a half of JC. And I mean, that's also when I met you. Like, that's also when we became friends, and that's when I also, like, I kind of started to find more solace in, like, you know, my other friends and communities that weren't at home. And honestly, it felt like this pressure that made me feel like I was, you know, having to hide things was mostly at home and from my parents. And so I kind of realized that, oh, I can kind of just do whatever I want now. And so, like, you know, I think that was when I really started using my name properly, and like started really using my pronouns properly, and having groups of friends that I, you know, trusted and expected to just like use those. Yeah, so I think things are a bit different for me now, just because so much has changed over the last couple of years. But that was when I really settled into my non-binary identity, and that's where I kind of felt like that discovery period was over, and that was where like the living started, like having that stable knowledge of oneself, and then being able to just have that fundamental truth locked in, but also, you know, having an open heart to whatever change comes, but being glad that I've reached that point. So that was how I discovered that I was trans.
Being non-binary is, in essence, being neither a boy nor a girl. Though it's important to note that being non-binary doesn't mean being in between being a boy and a girl, necessarily. A lot of non-binary identity can be quite complex and confusing to understand, especially if you're just beginning to think about gender and transgender identities. So, for a beginner's understanding, just think about it being neither male nor female.
You know, it took a long time. I was older when I found out. I think I was 28 or 29. I went through some stuff, and I attempted suicide. And then when it was like when I woke up, I was like a different person. And I was like, I'm not gonna like be fake anymore. Like, I'm just gonna be whoever I am, and like people are gonna have to deal with that. And so along with that came, you know, I kept meeting more trans people. And I didn't really have like the words before to describe my experience, especially being non-binary. I saw, you know, binary trans people, and I was like, oh, that's cool for them. That's not me. And so I didn't really connect with it for a long time until I finally met some non-binary trans people, and that's when I started slowly coming out of my shell. I was about 28 or 29, yeah.
I also asked them about their transition, or the process a trans person has to go through to present the way they want to the world. Whether it be a haircut or a wardrobe change, or even starting HRT, hormone replacement therapy.
Yeah, for me, because I know that there's no like one way to be trans, and like the rules are different for everybody. And I would say like definitely in this, I feel like I got like a better end of the stick, because I don't feel the need at the moment to like seek any medical transitioning or anything. Or I mean, I have like plans to start binding again, because I think just during the pandemic and like just during like the migration here, I just kind of like let that all go. And I think because also like the cultural expectations shifted here, so I kind of didn't really like care about my presentation, and I kind of just did whatever I wanted. So like how I look now is honestly like really different from how I looked like 3 years ago. But for me, like I didn't become like more or less non-binary, like that stayed the same. So I think it was just me doing whatever, because I don't care about how I look and that kind of thing. But I think like for me, like moving forward, I think I do have like plans to I have plans to start binding again this year. So I'm actually going to try to use, I don't know if you've heard of it, like trans tape, where it's like you kind of use like this special kind of tape thing that you can use to like bind your chest instead of using a binder, because even though I loved my binder, like it wore out really easily. I wear out all my things. That's just who I am. So I just kind of think I need to try this instead. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So testosterone has been great. The first thing I noticed was my mood was so much better. Like, I am a different person on hormones. pounds, I am so much happier, so much more, I have so much more energy. And so that was the first thing, is I noticed just this change in my just like being. And then just, wow, testosterone is, it works very fast. There's lots of changes that go on. I have so much hair now. And then my voice changed pretty fast. And it's still changing to this day. There's still changes going on all the time that I'm like, oh, fascinating. And like, I'm like, oh, look at that beard hair that I'm growing today. My hairline changed. That was fascinating. Just there's so many changes. My body the shape is all different because the fat redistribution, I think I said that word right, has just changed. And so and also my hips tilted. And so now walking is different, which I had no idea that would be a thing.
Did it take you some time to get used to?
Oh, I'm still not used to it. Like, I stand differently. And I'm like, oh, and it's just very strange to realize my hips are just in a different orientation. But all the things have been fascinating to get used to and just taking some time.
So I also wanted to ask about how being trans in the States is specifically.
It's terrifying. There's for so many reasons. There was not long ago a trans woman in Indianapolis. Like, a lot of the people I knew this woman, and she was murdered on her way home from work. Right. So like, just being trans is scary. But then there's this constant attacks on us in the court. Right now they're working on banning trans girls from playing sports here in Indiana. I know what's going on in a lot of other states, but right here it just passed the House and the Senate committee. So now it's going to the full Senate for vote, the full Indiana Senate, and that's going to be this upcoming week. So it's this balance between I'm like scared to like be outside, and also I need to be outside so that other younger, less experienced trans people like see me, right? And see other trans people that look like them, because that's not that was not my experience. So I think it's important for me to be pretty loudly trans, but also like it's scary. Like I'm not working right now, so I'm like afraid to get a job because I'm about to probably grow a beard, and I don't know how that will be accepted. And also just like having to go to interview after interview and like not knowing if I didn't get that job because I was trans, right? And then there's school. School's been a lot easier, but like all my stuff is my old dead name, and like they won't change it. My teachers luckily will talk to me and use Randy, but like all of my actual documentation is my dead name. Luckily that's going to be changed soon.
A dead name is generally the name a trans person uses when they grow up, and is also a name that they aren't using anymore now that they have transitioned. To dead name somebody used to use that name even though they're not using it anymore, and is generally considered very harmful to trans people.
A lot of it is familial stuff, right? Because that's who you deal with on a day-to-day basis. My family is not very supportive. Some of them try. It took them a long time to even try. We had my son's birthday party at my mom's house this weekend, and I got dead named like 5 times, which is only 5 times, but also 5 times. So that's hard because they'll fight about it, and they think they have good intentions, and maybe they do, but like the way that they ask questions is invasive and just not super supportive. So that's, luckily I have a friend base that's lovely and very supportive, but family is a hard thing because I live in such a red state. It's very Republican here, very like don't take our guns and all the things. And so that's my family, and they don't understand. But they're trying. Yeah.
Well, speaking of family, you've mentioned a few times that you have kids, so I wanted to ask about that.
Yeah, I have 2 kids, Ethan and Cameron, and they both came out to me as trans a few weeks ago. One came out to me a few months ago, and one came out a few weeks ago. So that's the new journey that we're both on. We're all 3 on. Well, and I also have an ex stepdaughter. I don't know how that works. I have ex stepdaughter. I was her step parent for 10 years. I'm sorry. I was his step parent for 10 years. He came out as trans to me first, and then Ethan did, and then Cameron did. And so all 3 of the kids that I've parented for any amount of time have come out to me as trans. And so that's neat.
Yeah, just in general, what's it like having to deal with parenting stuff?
Parenting stuff is hard, especially because I co-parent. So my ex-husband is not super supportive of me being trans. He doesn't even really know that Ollie is, he thinks daughter is trans because he's just not, they're worried about coming out to him. So working with another parent is hard because I get dead-named a lot. I get she-heard a lot. I get mommed a lot. My kids call me mom sometimes, and it doesn't bother me so much because I'm their mom. But they've started calling me parent/guardian, which is long but hilarious.
Like full title parent/guardian?
Yeah, that's what they
That's
say.
great.
Parent/guardian. But then, I haven't come out to their school, and so I get missed a lot. I get mommed a lot from school, which is what it is. I haven't come out to them, so that's not their fault. But I'm afraid to. They go to a school in a very snooty, rich place around Indianapolis, and so I'm not very comfortable coming out to them. The kid is going to switch schools soon because he's going to 6th grade, and I might start off just coming out to them and wait for Cameron to switch schools too. So it's complicated because I have these feelings of love towards my children, but also I hate the name being called I hate being called mom. But watching them come out and figure things out is really fascinating.
It's genuinely a really cool experience to just think about trans kids having a parent that's also transgender to be able to explore with them.
Yeah, we're going through Ethan. They're going through puberty right now. They just are starting puberty. And so am I, really. I've been on hormones for about a year and a half. And so we're both going through the same changes. And so we get to talk about it, and I'm really open about whatever they have questions about, because I think that's important. It's just to be open and accepting of however they want to be, really.
So, if I'm getting the timeline right, there was a period of time where you had to come out to them, essentially?
I did. And that was hard for them. They didn't mind. They were okay. That part of it was fine. The changing of language has taken some time. And interestingly, Cameron was very much against using they them pronouns. He had already been drilled into it had already been drilled into his head that they them was plural. And he was 8. And finally he's they've come out and they're gonna use they them pronouns. But they initially were very against it because of grammar. But now they realize they can break rule. And they're oh, that's not an all the time rule. Maybe I can use that. Okay. And I think that happens a lot, is people will push against something before they realize, oh, that's what I wanted. And so there was some time where it was hard for them, and now they've gotten a lot better. But they accepted it immediately. There was no kids get it. They just get it, and adults just don't.
During our interview, Professor Skelton also had some very interesting information to share about trans children in Singapore.
Singapore is very good at that, sort of holding intention. But of course, what we do know is the sort of side effects of that are invariably damaging for so many people, and the vulnerability that people are placed in. And that, to me, is the part where the social justice isn't being afforded to the people who do need it. And the shift to, active inclusivity of all Singaporeans and people who want to spend their time in Singapore, and the rights that should be afforded to people are yet to come to a large extent. But I do think they're changing. But while ever you've got, the Ministry of Education that refuses to allow an adaptation of a school uniform for somebody who wants to sort of either be, kind of not neither male or female, and just have something that's acceptable as a school uniform, to force somebody into a different way of clothing and dressing and presenting is, I don't get it. I don't understand it. It's not just boys and girls anymore. We know that, and there's loads of evidence, and globally we know that. And what CORE and the Ministry of Education particularly should be thinking about is what's right for children. And Singapore is a signatory to the Convention of the Rights of the Child. And if they looked at the sort of legal elements, or the sort of expected international framing of the Convention of the Rights of the Child, then they would see that there's a lot in there for 18 and younger people who actually are having their rights denied. And one of them is the right to perform and present as an identity of their choice. And Singapore, therefore, is a signatory, but isn't being fair or following it through effectively. And that means it goes up from the body, and it scales right up to the global. And there's a lot of work to be done in between to create a more just society. And really, children should be put forward and supported through those kinds of laws and rights, really, that they should have. And in Singapore, in lots of ways, they are denied. And then what's the point of signing the convention if you don't follow it through?
For this last segment, I wanted to focus on a story that Gray had. This doesn't have anything to do with trans people specifically, but I still wanted to highlight this story because I think it paints a very good picture of what LGBT people have to face when dealing with institutions in Singapore.
I guess I might as well pretty much go into like my church story in Singapore, because in Australia it was pretty much inconsequential, but church was like a big part of my Singapore life. Like I was in like a mega church, like a really big church, and when you have like such a big like religious organization like that, there's a structure to things, and there's like a definite kind of like, being in a small church now, the vibe is way different, where it's like everything feels more personable, everyone knows each other. But when you're in a big church, there are like, I'm still like really like lenient towards the church, I think, in my affection for like church and like just the people in there that I've met, and like the people like my friends and stuff that I love, who I know love me, and like that's all great. But like church has an organizational like structure, especially like the big churches, like it is, it's like, it's not good. I mean, like as far as like a normal like structure of organization goes, like yeah, you have leaders that answer to like, you have an authority that answers to a bigger authority, that, and they're like chains of command, and then you have so many like managerial kind of aspects that in order to like cater to like such a big group, you have to make moves, be a business, that kind of thing. You need volunteers to work, and you need to like have a way of running things. It's like all good and everything, but I think there was like a point in time where things were like different for me from the get-go, because I was serving in church almost as soon as I hit the youth church in secondary school. So serving in church, by that meaning I was like on a platform, and I was like on stage, I was like singing and worshiping, that kind of thing. So like this is one of those things where like, so I was like singing and serving in church. So I was singing on stage, I was like doing rehearsals, and then I was pretty much, my community in church were the leaders, and like were all the in kind of like all the in groups, like all the not in group, but like people who were like who were deep into church, not just the casual kids going around. But I was like friends with all the other, with people who were older than me, like all the adults in who were serving in church as well, and like all the crew and like the staff that people like that the church had to like hire. And it's like those were my community in church. Like those were like the people who I didn't really have like a strong connection to, like my age peers in church. So I think that what am I saying? Hold on, I'm losing my train of thought. This has happened so long ago, but I'm just trying to remember what it was like for me back then. Like I was really young when this happened, but I literally, like, the first time I served in church was when I sang an item with my sister in main service. And this means this is adult main service. So this is me as I was 13 singing in front of like 15,000 like Christian adults about like, you know, some like worship song. And it's like, it's all good, and like it was fun. That's the kind of person I am. Like, you know me, like I'm a performer, I'm a singer, and like it's whether it's on purpose or not, I find myself on stages a lot singing. And like I don't know if that's like a calling of mine, but like I believe it's a calling of mine, but I also have faced like contention because of it. So basically, because that was my first thing, was singing an item in church, then I was invited to join like the youth worship team in secondary school youth. And then so basically from there, like there were other servers as well that would come in eventually, but it was like during that period of time that I like realized that I was queer, that I realized like I was serving in church. I was serving in church when I was 14, and then at 14, 15 I was realizing like, oh, I'm attracted to girls, oh, I'm gender non-conforming, and like my presentation started skewing that way as well. And it's like, I think it was just, it felt so bad for me because I had like a lot of pressure and expectation to be a certain way because I had a platform that honestly I didn't ask for it, but I was like a willing participant to be on this platform. But like that came with like a lot of expectations that it kind of hit me, I think, when I was a couple years into it. That's like, oh, I like dug myself into a hole, because if I'm going to like continue exploring, if I'm going to continue thinking about, you know, my sexuality and gender, and if I do come to a conclusion that I'm queer in any sort of way, that's going to have like, that's not going to be good for me. Like there's no way for me to come out in this kind of environment. And so basically what ended up happening was I met my first girlfriend like in church, because she was crushing on me from the crowd when I sang on stage. And then she approached me at a youth camp because she wanted to take a photo with me because she had a crush on me. And then kind of liked her instantly. And then we became friends, and then we started going out, all while I was still serving in church. So that's like, if that got out, I don't know if that would have, how bad that would have been. But I think as soon as any kind of church leaders got a whiff of that happening, I was kind of like immediately taken aside and sat down with. And this was with my like personal group leaders who like I love and adore, and I know who like cared about me a lot. But it's like they were saying a lot of stuff that, you know, I was expecting it, but like it kind of really hit me that like, okay, yeah, this is over. And then like the day that they sat down and talked to me, oh my god, I remember it like so clearly. It was like I had picked the set because I was supposed to lead on the set that weekend. And then I was like, we had rehearsed for it. I was so ready. I was still like, I had just gotten into that groove where I was like confident enough to be able to lead worship, that I was really excited for this set to come around. I'd picked all the songs, and then like the evening before, it's like, hey, someone else is going to sing your set. We need to sit down with you and like really talk with you in the morning. And like when I got that in the afternoon, I like a part of me was like I think I was super in denial what was happening. I was like, no, there's no way there's no way this is happening right now. We've like, okay, technically like I wasn't careful. And basically what they told me is that like they saw me with my girlfriend at the time, and they saw us together going on what was obviously a date or something. To this day I still don't know what they saw, which is like hilarious. But we had only been like dating for 3 months at the time. So yeah, so it was November 2016 was when we got together. And then they gave me then I got that text in February next year. February? January 19th, Saturday evening. Yeah, so I got the text, and then like the next day when I sat down in front of like my church leaders, and they were just like, hey, we just want to check. Oh my god, the conversation started so nice. They were like, hey, how are you doing? And I immediately jump into like a bubbly, like happy conversation about how I am, and then they hit me with like, this is serious. And then I immediately like am dying inside. Yeah, and then I'm trying to remember that first conversation. It was like one of the first things they told me is that they had concerns because of the way I was dressing. Like, that was the first thing they pointed out to me. The way that I dressed. I wasn't even, like, binding while I was in church, mind you. Like, I was just had short hair. Like, that's literally the extent of it. Like, I just had short hair. In church. And then, I don't know, I guess I, like, liked to wear a Letterman jacket. And wore jeans. Like, no one wears like skirts and stuff on stage anyway. Like, it's all very like this, like, in terms of like physically trying to present in a way that is like not traditionally feminine, the only thing I could say I did was not put on makeup and have my hair cut. But to everyone else, that was like enough. You know, like, to like people looking at me, like, that was enough, because I'm just like, I was just immediately clocked as like this is just not a typical gender non-conforming, basically. They clocked that. So like they told me that first, that they had like concerns, and then they also told me that they saw me and my girlfriend out somewhere else, and I was like, I immediately denied it. I basically just said, we're not dating. The person who you're talking about is just a friend. There's nothing going on. But, and then I said, but while we're on the topic of queer people, let me give you some of my thoughts on how I feel like people are unfair towards them and why queer people deserve rights. They were grilling me for having a girlfriend. I told them to stop being homophobic. And then after that conversation, I went back into church, sat in the crowd as someone else sang my set, and then I went over to my girlfriend's house and broke up with her. Yes. Yeah. I was crying on the train to our house, thinking about what I should do, and like, I was just like, they found out, I have to break up with you. I don't want them finding out it was you, even though they probably already know, but I'm the one who everybody knows. No one knows who you are. For me, in my head, I was making it like a really like self-righteous kind of thing, like, oh, I have to bear the brunt of this burden so people don't like attack her about it. But I think I was just a coward. I wasn't good at the relationship. I just think, I don't know, there was so many better ways I could have handled that, and I know it like hurt her after the fact, but I didn't do anything to help her, pretty much. I just almost immediately cut her out and then left like that. And then after the fact, I had a lot of sit downs with a lot of like authorities about it. You know, like, I hadn't come out to anyone. I hadn't admitted to anything yet, but at this point I was like, not to be serving. I had, scheduled some meetings with like the pastors in the pastors of the youth church to just like sit down and talk to them. And I guess I'm trying to remember, like, that first conversation that I had with them was with my sister there, because she had no idea what was going on. She just knew something was really serious, and that and then something was really serious. I was just dating a girl. Like, what the hell? Yeah, so I was like talking to like the pastors. I was like breaking down. I was telling them that like I just like felt like all this pressure. I told them that I needed a break from serving because I don't know what I said. I can't deal with this. And I still didn't come out. I still didn't say it. But I think it was because I distinctly remember it was because I wanted to come out to my sister before I did anything else. Because before I talked to any of these guys, like, my sister is the one who deserves to, like, know who I am. So after that conversation, she was like, we just sat down in a park, and she was like, what is going on? What is this all about? I have no idea what's going on. And so I just told her that, like, oh, I'm bisexual. All of this is happening is because I'm dating a girl and they found out. And like, she already kind of knew because she had already like seen us together, because I'd already like had her over at our house a couple times, but like, I'm pretty sure she clocked it already. And I asked her stuff about this before when I was still like trying to figure out what was going on with myself. Like before, like back in like 2015, I was like, I had a big argument with my parents because my mom called gay people criminals, and I was like, why did you say that? So, yeah, so I think it was just after I just came out to my sister and we kind of just like had that moment of solidarity, that afterwards going into church, I was like, yeah, I had a lot of conversations with like church authority, and I think I even have some of them recorded down because I was freaking like that. I remember I had like one conversation with like my group leaders, like my personal group leaders, who was like telling me how they have like a guy, like they knew a guy who was like struggling with gay thoughts in church, and then they all sat down and talked with him, and like they just talked through it honestly, and he's with a girl now, and I'm like, that's so sus. And I'm like, I can't say that I went through anything close to what conversion therapy is, so I can't say that that's what happened, but like I remember like being encouraged, like not being encouraged, I'm being like in quotes encouraged, that like these are feelings that will pass. Oh, I felt these too one time. Oh, these are just like worldly feelings that, you know, they're not right, and they will change if you pray about it, you know. And like I remember like one like particular line that they were intent on like telling me that like, oh, the end goal, like they would like trying to give me all like these case studies about like gay people who had like settled into like a really nice like heteronormative relationship while still like being gay or something, and it's like, and they were telling him like heterosexuality is not the end goal, but the end goal is like spirituality. And I was like, I understand your sentiment, but that's like, I just knew that like their approach to it, like their fundamental thinking of it just wasn't convincing. Not even convincing. It's like, I knew it was bullshit. Like they care a lot about heterosexuality, and they like the church cares so much about heterosexuality to the point of where it's not about being heterosexual, but it's about the dating environment in that church is so controlling. They discourage any dating at all in secondary school. And it was so like if you wanted to date someone else in your group, you would have to be secretive about it, even if it was like BGR, because they straight up didn't want any BGR in church. Like they were just like, okay, we understand if you like want to date people, and like of course people did it anyway, but like genuinely it was like something that you would need like a sit down with like a leader to just talk about, like, hey, are you sure you want to be in a relationship? And it wasn't even about like homophobia or anything. It was just like these relationships were seen as like so precious that it needed to be the church's business. Yeah. And then like, so like your typical expectation is like in secondary school youth, you shouldn't have BGR. But when you get to like the JC youth and like the university youth, that's when you all start pairing up. And I didn't really realize that until I got to the JC one either, until the JC church either, because I stayed in church throughout it all. Like throughout all of it, throughout all the sitting down and the talking to, throughout the being kicked off the worship team, and then being cut off from, not being cut off, but cutting myself off from every other friend that I had in like the worship team with like no explanation, and then everybody else like kind of watching it happen from afar, being like, oh, why isn't this person on stage anymore? Or like just straight up being asked, hey, when are you coming back to worship? I would just like laugh and be like, I don't know. Because I told them, like, I was like telling people that I was taking a break so I could focus on school. So like, but then years went past and I never went back. So I think people kind of just realized, oh, they found out you were gay. So yeah, it's pretty much like at the time it was something so hush hush. But I think now it was like pretty much an open secret that not a lot of people have really, not a lot of friends have really ever sat down and talked to me about it. And I guess I'm just don't talk to a lot of old friends that I used to see all the time. But, you know, I moved on and I still found a new community in church, you know, that I loved and that I know cared about me and didn't care about my sexuality and supported me. And that was within church. And it's like, it's a big church. There's like a lot of room for like personal communities. It was just with the authority and like the expectation to uphold. Oh my god, I freaking remember when one of my friends in church, she joined the choir, and she said that when you join like the church choir, they make you like tick a form, and like and there's like terms and conditions or something or whatever, just like a form for like application, and like one of them is like, oh, you don't suffer from like mental illness, and like another one is like, oh, you aren't gay. And I was just like, I heard that and I was like, are they serious? And the thing is, because I was like, I first sang in church because of like my sister and her leader's recommendation when I was 13, I skipped all of that. Like, I skipped the long way to get into worship. I just cut right to being there, and then it turned out I was gay. And whoops! So, that's kind of the whole story of those years where that happened. Yeah. Like, it's a lot. I can't say, like, obviously it was very taxing on me, like, mentally, but not for a second did I think I faced any serious repercussions of like, or harm, which I guess is a testament to how much like I trusted the people there. But like, I think I was still really emotionally hurt. Like, it was like a huge rejection that I think I'm sometimes still grappling with today.
To end off, I asked everyone if they had any final messages they wanted to send off to the listeners.
Well, I may go first. This I have to detach myself from the subject, from I guess my personal self. But it, I myself, I have a very different background. I think so. I said I was born in Japan, and I grew up in Japan. Back when I grew up, I come from a very strange family. I come from a very abusive family. I grew up without having a father, and my mother was drinking and smoking until she died. She was very unhealthy, and she had many different men in her life that influenced me. And having a more complex life as a child was not easy. I did not have people to talk to, because if I speak to other people about how what kind of violence was going on in my family, they will completely stop talking to us. Right? It was very challenging, and I became very protective of my younger sister, who is 5 years younger than me. Anyway, so I think I feel more about those who come from a different background, and LGBT community people tend to be in this, different background, right? So if somebody is listening to this and thinking that there's nowhere to go, or you don't fit into the society, I'd like to say it's okay. It's okay not to fit in, and don't let other people make you feel bad only because you don't have what other people have. You have what you have, and you have to cherish yourself first, because if you cannot make yourself happy, you cannot make anybody else happy.
Well, Mihei, it's interesting because my growing up wasn't about alcohol and smoking and things, but for a 10-year period, I had a very, very difficult time because of the stepfather. And I protected my two younger sisters as much as possible, and I would look after my mum after each violent attack on her, and would come downstairs and check if she was still alive sometimes when my father had left the room. So I can totally empathise with that. We have a lot in common, and so we know how painful that is. But
well, I never said anything. Yeah, I never said this to anybody because it's quite personal. But thank you, Tracy. We have a lot in common. Yes.
But what I think struck me about learning about this was how unjust it was. So it shouldn't have happened. There should have been help and things, but it was a similar thing. Don't tell anybody. And each time there were major arguments and fights, I would hope that the neighbours would hear and would come and find something. but they were both elderly and they were very deaf, and they never heard. And that was when I realized that, you know, you're just on your own and you've got to deal with it. So I mean, happily, my family turned around when I was 15. My mum met my who's my current stepdad, and he's still with us. And that was a shift around, and things got a lot better. But what I think it gave me was a really strong drive about fairness, and the kind of separation out of people and the stigmatizing of people. I just didn't understand it. I couldn't see why people would do that to each other. And my mum was a great advocate of fairness. And so for the three of us, she never had favourites or anything like that. We felt treated the same way. And she was always there to sort of support us as much as she could, despite the difficulties she was going through herself. And for me, it was about education. But education, of course, was very normative. And I found I didn't fit in with that. You know, I came from a divorced family, which in that era of time was not what happened. And so as soon as you feel you're pushed out onto that edge and you don't fit, then you either fight it and challenge it and cherish it as a sense of thinking, this is who I am and this is what I want to do, or you get pushed out and you can't. And so I guess what I would like to say is that, you know, not fitting in is actually, I think, much more interesting, and it gives you a different perspective. It allows you to see something from another perspective of other people. So I was never blinkered around, you know, what was going on around me. I was always observant. I always knew the children who needed more support at school when I was in second, you know, school with them or whatever. And I would intervene in arguments and fights in the playground and try and talk people through stuff, because it just didn't see the point of having that anger and that negativity, because it's about people. Yes, there are people who are really nasty and evil and we don't want them in our lives, but that's not people who are trying to work out what their gender identity is, or people who are, you know, absolutely certain they're lesbian or gay, and they just want to be who they are and with who they are and so forth. So I think it's about being bold. I know it's a risk being bold as well, but there are more and more support systems available. And there's also the sense of looking for allies, finding out who your friends are, trying to have conversations with your family, which I know can be very, very difficult if people just, you know, they have a completely different perspective on what gender is. And just keep working at finding that. And it's going to be tough. It's always tough for being on the edges and the margins, but it's actually great as well, because the diversity of life and the diversity of opinions and the diversity of care that comes through is important. And it's important that people give that care, and it's important that people know when to accept that care. And I think Singapore is working very well around lots of mental health issues and well-being and so forth. And I think that will stretch out to include, you know, the wider population. We've got to do it for our students. And so then that's a ripple effect out into hopefully wider society as people learn the fact that care and bravery are important factors and should be celebrated.
I think one message that I would like tell, like, I don't know, of like a piece of advice that I could tell anyone would be to just have good friends that you can talk about this with. I know it's like really hard, and like community, and like it's hard to like find community these days, but even like if it can't be in person, even if it's just like joining a support group, or like finding people on the internet who are willing to talk to you about it, I think just reaching out to other people and having a space where you can just be honest about what you're feeling without having all the bullshit that comes with having those feelings be known to everybody is so important. Because it's not just it'll help you on your journey, but it's also just like a place where you can go to when everything else goes, when you feel like other places in your life can't. Like, I don't think I would have been able to survive going through that stuff in church if I didn't have people outside of church who were there to affirm that no, there's nothing wrong with me, that no, that I'm not doing something wrong because I'm just being who I am. I don't I think if I only had those people telling me that I needed to change or else God wouldn't love me. I think if I only had those people to listen to, I would have believed them, and I think I would have turned out way worse than I did.
I think I would say to really look into yourself and just be who you are and like just accept people for their truth, because you don't know their truth, and if they tell you something, you should just believe them. And you should believe yourself too. If you think, oh well, maybe maybe I'm trans, but like that was me for a long time. Was this? Oh, but do I fit? Do I? Yeah, you fit. And if you want to, that means you can be.